welcome wherever you are in the world, here in Nigeria and our viewers around the globe. Today on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Over 2,000 civilians reportedly killed so far as Russia intensifies its attacks on key Ukrainian cities on the 7th day of its invasion.
The United Nations says more than 800,000 people have now fled Ukraine.
And the second round of talks between Ukraine and Russia is set to take place today. Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amarachi Ubani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. It's day 7 of the Russian assault, and Ukrainian officials say about 2,000 civilians have lost their lives in the conflict.
That's right. Armies of both countries have been involved in intense fighting since Russian troops entered Ukraine.
1 week into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its troops have made significant advances into the country, but have so far failed to take the capital, Kyiv, and other major cities.
Let's take a quick look at the latest developments on day 7 of the invasion.
Russia has intensified its attacks on key Ukrainian cities, with fighting raging for a 7th day in the northeast and south. Ukraine says Russian paratroopers have landed in Kharkiv in the northeast, with heavy fighting reported. Emergency services in the country say at least 4 people have been killed by Russian shelling today. In the south, Russia says it has taken control of the port of Kherson, but its mayor says it's still held by Ukrainian forces. The mayor of Kiev is warning its residents that Russian forces are moving in on Ukraine's capital and has urged people to stay indoors and prepare to defend the city. An armored Russian convoy stretching 40 miles, that's about 65 kilometers in length, is approaching from the city's north, and analysts believe it could be there to provide support for an invasion attempt from the west. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is aiming to erase Ukraine.
It is beyond humanity. This rocket strike proves that for many people in Russia, our Kiev is absolutely foreign. They don't know anything about our capital, about our history, but they all have orders to erase our history, erase our country, erase us all.
According to him, nearly 6,000 Russian troops have been killed so far. Ukrainian authorities say more than 2,000 civilians have been killed so far in Russia's invasion, which began nearly a week ago. Rescuers have put out more than 400 fires, which broke out after Russian shelling across the country and defused 416 explosives. The United Nations says more than 800,000 people have now fled Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US says it will ban Russian airlines from its airspace, following the lead of the European Union and Canada. As fighting continues in Ukraine, the conflict is also continuing to push up global oil prices, despite new measures aimed at calming markets.
Meanwhile, according to reports, peace talks will resume this evening between Russia and Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Russia's delegation will be ready to continue talks, but it's unclear whether Ukrainian officials will turn up. It follows a first round of talks in Belarus, not far from the Ukrainian border, which failed to reach any resolution. According to reports, President Vladimir Putin's aide, Vladimir Medinsky, will once again be chief negotiator for Russia. There's no word yet on where the talks might take place.
And to countries evacuating their citizens, the first evacuation flights carrying Nigerians fleeing the fighting in Ukraine will be arriving back home tomorrow, March the 3rd, 2022. And that's because the flights are leaving Nigeria today, having sorted through logistics like landing permit issues. Earlier today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a statement saying the chartered flights will depart today, March 2nd, to pick up Nigerian evacuees back home. The statement goes on to list the flights and the number of people expected on each of them. A MAX air flight to Romania is expected to pick up 560 persons, Air Peace to Poland 364 persons, and Air Peace to Hungary 360 persons. The ministry has received records of evacuees by the Nigerian embassies at Hungary, where 650 persons have shown interest in being evacuated, while 350 persons in Poland, 940 in Romania, and 150 persons in Slovakia. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has approved $8.5 million for the immediate evacuation of at least 5,000 Nigerians from Ukraine. The approval, according to the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Zubairu Dada, the approval was issued at today's Federal Executive Council meeting presided over by Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo.
The Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs wrote a memo to the President seeking for funding to enable us conduct this exercise. She has told you herself that the memo was in the tune of $8.5 million, which Mr. President has graciously approved.
Okay.
That, like I said, includes, that provision entails arrangements to evacuate not less than 5,000 Nigerians. Whatever happens, you can be rest assured we are going to run any number of shifts that it will involve. Don't forget that it also involves taking care of those Nigerians that may decide not to come back. It also includes some assistance. The feeding that may have been done by the missions under whatever arrangements. And the missions themselves are they're hamstrung. They are also in very, very dire situations. So it's a whole gamut of activities that are involved.
The Nigerian ambassador to Poland, Ambassador Christian Ugwu, intended to join us on the program today, but he's been called into a meeting with the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Just a while ago, I spoke to him via telephone on his way to that meeting about the conditions of at the 8 border points Poland shares with Ukraine and the plans for evacuating Nigerians, which he says will begin at 9 a.m. local time tomorrow morning. So I know that there are 8 border crossings between Poland and Ukraine, and you've been shuttling between one of them, to the capital. What sort of reports are you getting from the other 7?
It is not only one that we've been operating. We've been operating on almost all of them. With 8 crossing points. So it is not one of them. It is not only one. We've been covering the 8.
Yes. So what sort of reports are you getting from all 8? Because there are reports of discrimination at the border, at the checkpoints, and all of that. So what sort of reports are you getting, sir?
I was there in all the crossing points. The discrimination is not the only word to use. In fact, in all the crossing points, they don't allow the blacks to cross. Even with the embassy officials, they don't allow us to get to the crossing point. There is places they're designated as evacuation centers. Their buses will ferry people from those crossing points to the evacuation center. And when you look at the buses, you hardly see any black in them. It is only during the midnight that you see blacks smuggling themselves, to enter the buses. So if they tell you that they, are discriminating, that is very, very correct. And this is the problem we are having. We have thousands of blacks, Nigeria mainly, stopped at the crossing point. The Ukrainians don't allow them to cross. They will tell them, go back to Ukraine and go and fight. This is what is happening.
Okay, so Poland has allowed for refugees to stay 15 days in the country without 15 days visa free. What happens when that period expires?
They will, whisk them to detention camp. Many Nigerians are already in detention camp that we have been going there, pleading with them to release them so that we'll evacuate them to Nigeria. So that is what they will do, because this country is very strict on laws. And I've addressed the Nigerians, please do stay within the hotel premises where we've accommodated you people. By the time you go out to the streets, the police will just arrest them. And most of these people are not with their passports to identify. So they have been, advised to stay within their hotel premises until when the aircraft comes. But the problem we are, investigating is that many of them don't want to leave Poland. They say they're staying in Poland. And this is not possible.
So the Polish government is also giving them that option of seeking asylum in Poland, and I know some Nigerians have accepted that. Will the Nigerian mission also be helping them to regularize, or will you leave them to their fate?
Well, it is not for me to determine. I will have to consult the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria to know their stance. It is them that will, tell me what to do. Then I work on their instruction.
So when is the flight expected in Poland, the evacuation flight?
Yeah, the flight will be here by 6 a.m. Nigerian time tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow being Thursday?
Thursday, yeah.
Okay, and when does it leave?
It will leave by 9 o'clock Nigerian time.
When you say 9, you mean 9 in the morning?
Yeah, 9 in the morning.
Okay. Ambassador, thank you for speaking with me, and good luck with all your efforts.
Please, you are welcome, and I'm very pleased to be with you.
Thank you.
Our interview there with the Nigerian ambassador to Poland. Now, over in the United Kingdom, the Ukrainian ambassador to the country, Vadim Prystaiko, today received a standing ovation from lawmakers in the House of Commons who applauded him as they watched proceedings from the public gallery. In a rare display of unity, MPs from all parties cheered loudly in support of Vadim Prystaiko, Ukraine's top diplomat in the UK, as Russia continues to wage war against the Eastern European country. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed that the UK would further ratchet up the economic pressure and support for Ukraine with finance, weapons and humanitarian assistance.
Gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around. I thank my right honourable friend, and I hope I can say today the Disasters and Emergency Committee is launching its Ukraine appeal, and every pound donated by the British people will be matched by the government, starting with £20 million.
Yeah. Leader of the opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer. Yeah.
Still to come on the programme. Well, in his first State of the Union address, US President Joe Biden says Vladimir Putin will pay continuing high price for invading Ukraine. Well, Welcome back. Our continuing coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine today. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, was hit much earlier in the day. So far, the government has counted over 2,000 civilians have been killed since the Russian invasion began 6 days ago. Today is day 7.
We're also hearing from the United Nations that more than 800,000 people have now fled Ukraine, and the number appears to be increasing.
Indeed, they're actually estimating over 1 million people could be leaving Ukraine. And we'll be monitoring and keeping tabs on Nigerians who are crossing the border into other neighboring countries. We just spoke to, we had that interview with the Nigerian ambassador to Poland. He's gone into a meeting now with the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have more discussions coming up. Foreign policy commentator Dele Ogun joins us now. He's in London. Dele, thank you for staying with us. I understand you joined us at the beginning of the program. The last time we spoke was on Diplomatic Channel, right? And, you know, it was sort of at the beginnings, you know, the early days of this tensions building up between Ukraine and with Russia. You called out NATO's expansion in the Baltic. Do you think Russia was goaded into this war?
Well, very clearly. I mean, one doesn't have to be an expert in international affairs to understand what's really going on here. In our last discussion, remember, I referenced the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union was looking to station missiles in Cuba, in America's backyard, and how the world came on the brink of nuclear war at that time, and the Soviets sensibly retreated and withdrew their missiles. And I said that this is where we are again. So one has to look at this from this perspective. If the roles were reversed, what would Biden do? He would do exactly the same thing that Putin is doing. And yet the hypocrisy is shocking. The outrage that they are whipping up as if they would never behave that way. If Putin was to station missiles in Venezuela, you will see them screaming from the rafters right now. So they really ought to, these so-called leaders of the free world should stop insulting our intelligence and asking us to swallow their impunity. It's sheer hypocrisy. This could have been avoided. All they needed to do was to provide the guarantees, the security guarantees that Russia and Putin were asking for, which were not unreasonable. Putin had seen the forward march of NATO as Russia stroke the Soviet Union retreated. Everywhere Russian influence was withdrawn from, NATO pushed forward to occupy it. And now it is looking to move right up close to them with Ukraine and asking the rest of the world to back what they're doing. I think it's time for the leadership of the world to move from these so-called free worlders. Let's try something different. We've been around this thing so many times. They simply can't help fighting because their whole economy, somebody pointed out very recently, their whole economy is built on warfare. Right. You see, once you've made the money from warfare, yes, of course, you could then come up with clever inventions and gimmicks and gadgets and all the rest of that. But it's how the fundamental profit is made. It is made through this policy of aggression, policy of warfare, and now the military-industrial complex is firing up, ready for action again. So we're tired of this stuff.
So let's look closely at the front lines. Russia says it has lost at least 7,000 soldiers since the invasion. Is that a testament to the military might the Ukrainian forces are putting up, backed by Western allies?
Well, not really. First of all, I'll say that it's a tragedy that we're hearing of fatalities in those numbers, especially when the world is just coming out of coronavirus pandemic. Think of all the sacrifices all of us made across the world to save that extra life, those extra lives. We accepted restrictions on our individual liberties. some missed funerals of loved ones, weddings cancelled. What for? And now these jokers are sacrificing life casually in a conflict that could so easily be avoided. Russia would have done its calculations in terms of the supports that NATO was going to give by the back door to Ukraine. And that's obviously part of Ukraine's own calculus. But every life that's lost, whether Ukrainian or Russian, is tragic. As I say, particularly when the world is just emerging from a pandemic. Nature has no choice. Nature follows its course. Human beings have a choice. NATO had a choice to give the guarantees that Russia was looking for. And it's down to NATO as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed, and interesting you should, raise the coronavirus pandemic, which is, well, we're still in the pandemic, interestingly, and no one's talking about, the thousands of people at the borders and, how there's no word on social distancing, there's no checks, nothing like that. The war seems to have engulfed everything else, and the main concern now is humanitarian efforts at the borders.
Yes, it makes a mockery of all the restrictions that were imposed on everybody across the world, where you couldn't see your loved ones or birthdays and Christmas. And now look at the crisis on the border where human beings are just a mass, no mask or anything. What's happened to all that? It seems as if they've been playing with us. They finished playing with us on coronavirus. And then they said, well, we're going to start now. Let's have a conflict. And look at the numbers that you're seeing on those images that you're showing up. What happened to the restrictions of coronavirus? What was all that about? I think the world is out of control under the leadership of these characters, the Bidens of this world. We thought Blair was bad, but it seems it's Blair Mark II that we've got. It's time for the truly civilized peoples of the world, the people of Africa, the people of Asia, to call these Anglo-Saxon Europeans to order. As I said in a recent interview, we're repeatedly dragged into their troubles. First World War, we were dragged into conflict. Second World War, we were dragged back into conflict. As soon as that war ends, they start the Cold War. As soon as the pandemic is over, they start this conflict. It's time for us to call time on them.
So the EU has been presented, with that request from the Ukrainian president for expedited membership. This is one of the reasons why President Putin is invading Ukraine. Do you think the EU should give in? What sort of response do you think they should give to the Ukrainian president? I know they're already supporting with military aid, and now there's a no-fly zone and a long list of sanctions they have reeled out against the Russian president. But why do you think Ukraine still wants to poke President Putin, with this EU membership still?
Well, we begin to get to the heart of this matter, don't we? With this new EU revived interest in bringing Ukraine into membership. Remember the genesis of where we are, how we got to where we are. The previous president, I think his name was Yanukovych, had rejected the EU invitation to treat. He exercised his sovereign right. Everybody talks about the exercise of sovereignty. On behalf of his people, he was the duly elected president. The EU made up proposals to him. He rejected it. He decided to go with a loan from Russia instead. Within months of that decision, riots, uprisings were instigated and sponsored by the NATO/EU axis. And before you knew it, Yanukovych was out of power. And he was in exile. And then they bring in their comedian president, Zelensky, our ex-stand-up comedian. They bring him in. And what is he doing? He now he's saying, yes, please, to the EU proposal. And please, could you fast-track that? That should help people to understand what's really going on here. The world is being played. There's an agenda that's been played out, and all the noise about the exercise of sovereignty, it's only respected when it goes in the direction and in line with the interests of those who consider themselves the policemen of this world, the NATO forces and the European Union. When the president exercises his so-called sovereignty in a manner that is anti or contrary to their interests, that is not respected. So we, the rest of the world, cannot afford to be played as fools in this game. We must understand it for what it is and call it out for what it is, that we see what's going on. Ukraine is being pushed to the front. Ukrainians are being sacrificed for a larger agenda. Behind them stands NATO. Behind them stands EU. The real agenda is not Ukraine's agenda. The real agenda is NATO's agenda in relation to Russia and the EU's agenda as far as Europe is concerned.
And also, Mr. Ogu, to think that Yanukovych is also fighting the war in Ukraine. A second round of peace talks are set to be held today. After the first one, Monday, ended 5 hours, no breakthrough. Do you think the talks could help both sides see eye to eye on issues? And this is despite holding strongly to their convictions.
Well, I mean, bear in mind it's not Ukraine talking. Ukraine is, Zelensky is more of a puppet in this exercise. The puppet master is NATO. The puppet masters are the European Union. It's about them and the understanding that they can reach with Russia. It's all been done over the heads of Ukrainians, both from the western part of Ukraine, who are Ukrainians proper, and the eastern parts of Ukraine, who, to my understanding, are more Russified Russians. All of this is happening over their heads. It's the accommodation, the power accommodation, that the European Union stroke NATO can come to in relation to Russia. That is the big picture. Russia demands those security guarantees. And if that can be brokered, the conflict will come to an end. Russia does not have territorial ambitions as far as Ukraine is concerned. What it does have is security concerns. And any responsible leader, and as I said earlier, if the roles were reversed and it was America and America's borders we were talking about, Biden will be doing exactly the same thing. Do not be deceived. And so the sooner they can come to their senses, which is what it's just tragic that they've allowed it to get to this extent, because Putin's reaction was predictable. They knew how he was going to react. They knew the sanctions that they were going to line up and impose even before he reacted. He knew they were coming. It's the rest of the world that were deceived and they're trying to create the impression that this one is just flared up. No, it didn't. It was all planned and carefully coordinated. And this now is where we are.
Foreign policy commentator, Mr. Delogu, thank you so much for joining us at this time.
It's a pleasure.
Well, ambassadors at the UN's conference on disarmament have condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, stressing on the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. The comments come after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reportedly said that if a third world war were to take place, it would involve nuclear weapons and be destructive. On Sunday, Moscow put its nuclear deterrent on high alert amid a barrage of Western reprisals over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In a speech, Japan's ambassador to the UN's conference on disarmament being held in Geneva said his country knows about the catastrophic use of atomic bombs, referring to the nuclear bombing by the United States on the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the Second World War.
The will to fight within that initial first phase of those 5 days was exceptional. But the product of that fighting was all of the changes that we saw within European security. So huge policy changes from the German government, the EU, the Swedish government, the Finnish government, the Swiss and Irish governments. We would not have seen that unification of effort on the European side had the Ukrainians folded in 2 or 3 days like we suspected. The Russian war machine has misfired. This is a very poorly planned operation and very poorly executed operation, especially in that first phase. But what we're seeing now from Tuesday onwards is a regrouping, a change in tactics, much more brutal tactics, which is actually how the Russian way of warfare is. Yeah, so the 40-mile-long convoy, the forward elements of that have now reached the Antonov airport, which is to the northwest of Kiev. It was a key objective in the initial assault for Russia, and it means that they're likely to put a forward deployed base there, and so they can start to bring in logistics by it also allows reinforcements, not just of heavy armor, but also critically of ammunition. And that'll mean that Kiev is effectively cut off and surrounded. The convoy thus far has not been targeted by the Ukrainian forces, which tells us that their ability to strike both from surface to surface and also their air forces quite likely heavily depleted, and they need to keep it in reserve for prioritization, and also that the Russian air defense assets are now in place. It's not too far from Russian air defense assets that have been massed in Belarus. Due to the fact that no one really knew what the full operation would entail, it seems highly likely that at an operational and tactical level, the troops on the ground were not actually told their objectives until very late. Which is significant because it means that the soldiers were unable to prepare. So do map studies, for example, to really understand the ground, to look at the intelligence that was coming out of the ground, which was either not listened to or it was very poor. So poor political and military leadership has just filtered down to the operational and tactical level and made this very difficult, huge logistics issues. That said, Russians still have mass. They have now put 80% of their forces that were committed to the borders of Ukraine into Ukraine. So it could still go Russia's way. They've just made it very difficult for themselves. So it looks like it's not confirmed yet that it's in full Russian control. That will be verified, I'm sure, today. But it looks like Kherson might be the first significant Ukrainian population center to fall to the Russians. Kharkiv is actually a quite pro-Russian population, so the Russians will need to be careful in terms of how indiscriminate their fire is, because it could turn even a Russian population against the Russian military. For the Ukrainians, the key part of the operation now is ammunition resupply, which is going to be very, very challenging in getting all of these capabilities that the Europeans have pledged that's currently in Poland to the front line. And that's almost where the Ukrainian resistance could succeed or fail. And the key difference now between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces is the morale component. The Ukrainians have fought very well and morale is very high, and that is infectious, and it is clearly not just between the Ukrainian professional soldiers but also the Ukrainian civil society as a whole. They see this as a fight for national survival. And on the Russian side, morale is very low and only going to get lower unless significant objectives can be taken within the next couple of days.
And that was research fellow in the European security at Rossi, Ed Arnold, on Russia's brutal tactics. In the meantime, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of war crimes after it launched an airstrike on the country's second largest city. An opera house, a concert hall, and government offices were struck in Kharkiv's Freedom Square on Tuesday. Later, Ukraine's military said Russian troops had parachuted into Kharkiv in an effort to capture the besieged city. The military said there were immediate clashes after the paratroopers landed. Earlier in the day, the main TV tower in the capital, Kyiv, was also hit, knocking media off air and killing 5 people. Moscow warned residents near Kyiv's military areas to leave their homes. Explosions sent smoke billowing from the steel structure, but the tower remains standing. And the VOA's Anna Chennikova is in Lviv for us. Anna, great to see you. What's the situation where you are?
Hi, great to see you. Well, I'm in Lviv, in the Lviv region, so situation here is quite okay. Sometimes we hear alarms, sirens, but nothing really happening. Anyway, we have a very strong civil defense groups here, and for now it's very safe. So it's quite safe, and people are ready to protect when needed.
So how are they protecting themselves? Are they carrying arms? Are they relying on Molotov cocktails? What exactly are the weapons they're using?
Well, the most important and the main thing is the civilian defense group. So it's territorial defense, as we call it. And yes, people, mostly men, but women as well. So people have weapons, they have ammunition, and they are organizing checkpoints. They check the cars which are passing, and they are getting ready to protect when needed. The society is very, very united, and I think this is the most important that we all have to understand. So civil forces, the civil defense is very strong emotionally, and they're quite prepared in terms of ammunition and weapons that they have. Obviously, it's not heavy weapons, but it's something to support our armed forces and be their strong back.
Anna, thank you. And it's also good to know that you're staying safe. It's day 7 now. And compared to the previous days, day 1, day 2, how would you describe the intensity of the invasion on both sides?
I think that yesterday was the worst because what we've seen in Kharkiv was just, I just would like to agree with our president. It was a war crime. What they're doing in Kharkiv is just, you just cannot realize, even being here, it's difficult to realize that this could happen in the 21st century. A lot of Zhytomyr, the town of Zhytomyr was also heavy shooted with heavy weapons and rockets. As well, Kiev, Russians tried to destroy the TV tower and Holocaust monument. Well, not monument, it's like a Holocaust, like a monument area. It's a huge area. So they didn't reach their destination, but there were casualties within civilians. So today was more or less, today was not that bad, I should say, but yesterday and day before were the worst. Obviously, we are getting ready for things to get more intensive from Russian side. So we're just getting ready to protect Kiev as much as we can. Kiev is not surrounded yet. We're still fighting for Kiev, and our forces, our armed forces, they're controlling what's happening around. So people are quite positive, and this is very important.
Anna, we seem to be hearing different figures of citizens caught in the crossfire. What can you confirm to us as to the numbers?
What we have now from official sources that 2,000 civilians been killed. Obviously, this amounts are not final, unfortunately. We don't have a final amount in terms of soldiers, the amount of soldiers that have been killed, but in terms of civilians, it's 2,000. And well, this is a tragedy that we just cannot yet, realize that it's actually happening.
I know, a difficult situation.
Yeah, and Anna, just before we let you go, the Russian government says it was only attacking military infrastructure in Ukraine. What can you tell us about this?
Well, they started with military infrastructure, which was on the 24th of February, from 4 a.m. to maybe 8 a.m. Afterwards, their main targets were schools, orphan houses, hospitals. And this is something that Ukrainians cannot understand at all. So this is not true. They're not targeting military. I mean, they do target military objects as well, of course. But unfortunately, what we can see now, especially if we talk about Kharkiv, Zhytomyr, Kherson regions, their main target are civilians, and this is a war criminal. What they're doing is just war. This is not what the rule of war is about. So unfortunately, I can confirm that civilians are suffering the most, and you can see the numbers: 2,000 civilians in 7 days.
Anna, thank you for speaking with us on the program, and we know how hard this is for you, you being a Ukrainian yourself and seeing your whole country crumble under Russian military forces. Thank you for sparing the time to talk to us about the situation there.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Still to come on the program, Pope Francis asks for fasting prayers for the people of Ukraine. Welcome back. Well, the UN nuclear watchdog is working with all sides after Russia's invasion of Ukraine on providing assistance requested by the country's nuclear regulator to ensure the safety of its facilities. That's according to the agency's chief, Rafael Grossi. Grossi says Ukraine's vast nuclear program makes the current situation unique, as there are a lot of nuclear material physically present. The IAEA says radiation levels at Ukraine's Chernobyl nuclear power plant have increased, but are still low enough not to pose a hazard to the public, despite the movement of Russia's military vehicles there.
We do not expect this assistance. Obviously, in the present circumstances, delivering assistance is not a straightforward or easy process. This is why I am in contact with all sides to ascertain in which effective way we could be providing this assistance. Since these consultations are ongoing, I would not be in a position to tell you right now what kind or when this assistance is going to be delivered. But I can confirm to you that active consultations are ongoing between myself and all the relevant partners in this process. One of the unique features of this situation we are all seeing is that this is an ongoing military conflict taking place in a country that has a vast nuclear program. 15 nuclear reactors, 4 big nuclear power plant sites, and all the facilities associated with it. So there is a lot of nuclear material physically present, and also the factor that these facilities provide more than half of the electricity of the country. So that already in and by itself says a lot. Without any politicization of the issue or
We're in the United States now, where President Joe Biden gave his first State of the Union address, announcing a closure of U.S. airspace to all Russian flights, saying that Moscow will be weaker by the end of its war against Ukraine. Addressing a joint session of Congress, President Biden said the U.S. is imposing powerful sanctions on Russia that are cutting off its banks from the international financial system and choking its access to technological imports. The U.S. president also hit out repeatedly at Russia's Vladimir Putin, saying that he alone is to blame for the war. Democrats and Republicans reacted to President Biden's appeal to show support for Ukraine by rising in unison to applaud.
$1 billion of direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid Ukraine. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions.
Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird watched the president's speech all night. Maria, thanks for staying up, well, really late to monitor President Biden give his first State of the Union address. And, you know, while he was announcing more sanctions on Russia, he also threatened President Putin. Tell us more about this and then how Americans are, you know, reacting to this as well.
Americans are reacting to this speech, I think, one of unity. They are very hopeful for the future of what the U.S. has in store. And I think that despite the war, despite some of the economic challenges, and despite still in somewhat of a pandemic, they are very, very hopeful that this speech last night will definitely be one, I think, that will go down in history. And I think it gives some clear details as to how he plans to move the country forward.
So, Maria, I watched as well, especially the parts where he talked about Ukraine. He started off by recognizing the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, and that, you know, elicited a standing ovation on both sides of the aisle. And then, you know, for several times during the speech, there were applause. There was a lot of applause for President Biden on both sides of the aisle, especially when he spoke about Ukraine. What was it about the speech that struck, you know, a chord with the Republicans? Because I noticed when he began to talk about infrastructure, the applause were only on the Democratic side.
Yes, you're correct. You know, when you talk about Ukraine, I think that whether you're Republican or Democrat, your hope is that your leader stands strong. And I think that he gave a voice of strength. He gave a voice of being a global leader. And I think that's what both Democrats and Republicans were looking for. And so when you talk about a country's independence and you talk about some of those very core American values, whether or not you sit on the side of the Democrats or Republicans, you try to hold some of those values of independence and righteousness and justice. I think that no matter where you sit, you're going to applaud for that. So that was, and remember, you know, President Biden has been a long time foreign relations expert, and he's known for being able to cross the aisle. So I think that was a moment where, you know, those who know him and really know his abilities and know his heart were there applauding for what they see as his strength as it relates to the Ukraine-Russia tension.
So, Maria, also in relation to the invasion, are you saying that there are no dissenting voices in the different camps, Democrat, Republican, Independent?
Well, we have heard from our former president as it relates to supporting Putin. And so to say there's no dissenting voice, I think that that is not accurate. But I think that the majority of Americans, wherever you sit, especially those who are longstanding Republicans, not some of the newer regime, what we saw through the Trump administration, but some of those longer standing Republicans are definitely going to be in support of the actions and the way in which President Biden is handling the U.S.-Russia tension.
And back to the president's speech, which we'll soon hear again. He also talked about closing Russian planes to American airspace. Now, is the U.S. and other countries totally unaffected by these mass sanctions coming in?
You know, I won't say they're totally unaffected. I think that these mass sanctions are definitely potentially going to impact and have impacted the way in which we're looking for the movement forward, especially when we look at oil prices. And gasoline has become a major, major concern for many Americans. And so we've seen it $1 more than it was last year. And so that is of one concern that the sanctions are definitely putting, and they're obviously putting some impacts on the larger economy as well across the globe. You know that the EU heavily depends on outside resources for most of their energy. And so that's, I think plans have been put in place to try to ensure that there's not a heavy impact by these sanctions. But we can probably likely see that right now and in days to come, there will be impacts.
Maria, as we said, we have just a clip of what President Biden said in Congress yesterday. But just before we go to that, I know that the UK Prime Minister got called out yesterday by a Ukrainian journalist for not announcing the Western allies were closing their airspace to Russian flights. But I know that part of the sanctions from the EU also involve a ban on flights from Russia as well as flights to Russia. And President Zelensky has called on, both the US and other Western allies as well to enforce this. So music in his ears, perhaps, what Biden said last night?
For sure. I think that President Biden was very clear on protecting the airways, and he was very clear about the Russian flights not making it to the U.S. and his NATO allies following suit. And so, you're correct. It is music to the ears of Ukraine, and I think the president will continue, as that big announcement last night, will continue to move forward with sanctions if we continue to see more bloodshed, obviously, and more unfortunate invasion on behalf of Russia into Ukraine.
Thank you, Maria Bird, joining us from Washington, D.C. Now let's go to just a bit of, clip of the first State of Union address of President Biden.
Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. We're choking Russia's access to technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States...
We're ending the program with a prayer from Pope Francis. Today is Ash Wednesday, and the Pope gave his weekly general audience at the Vatican today. He asked people to remember Ukrainians in underground shelters seeking protection from bombardments and thanked Poland for taking in the bulk of the refugees from the war. He's declared today a day of prayer and fasting for peace in Ukraine. And we're all praying for Ukraine as well.
I was just going to say that. And that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.
And I'm Amarachi Ubani. See you next time.